Sean Diddy Combs isn't the only powerful figure in the music industry facing a lawsuit or two, well, in his case, nearly 40 of sexual misconduct. Sean Carter, aka Jay-Z, is named in a sexual assault lawsuit along with Diddy, accused of raping a 13-year-old in 2000. Country legend Garth Brooks is accused of sexually assaulting his hair and makeup artist in 2019. And music producer and DJ Thomas Pence, better known as Diplo, was accused of revenge porn. The allegations vary in the different lawsuits these men face, but they all have one thing in common. Their accusers have remained under anonymity and are bringing about their lawsuits under the moniker Jane Doe. Now, before we get into all of this, all four men have denied the allegations made against them. In Diplo's case, a federal judge ruled at the end of last year that his accuser cannot remain anonymous if she wanted to continue her lawsuit against the DJ. In her filing, this Jane Doe claimed that she had an intimate relationship with Diplo from 2016 to 2023. But during that relationship, he allegedly recorded himself having sex with her multiple times without her consent. She claims he even distributed the images and videos to other parties through text and Snapchat. Doe claims there were some occasions she gave Diplo permission to record them, but never gave permission for him to distribute the images and videos. But when the judge ruled she couldn't stay anonymous, she dropped her lawsuit against the producer 2 weeks after the ruling was made. In the judge's December 31st ruling, she wrote, quote, "The court appreciates that plaintiff's allegations in her complaint are sensitive and of a highly personal nature, and that she may face some public scrutiny. However, absent a demonstrated need for anonymity, there is a prevailing public interest in open judicial proceedings." In Diddy's cases, however, it's been a mixed bag of rulings. In 2023, a Jane Doe accused Combs, former president of Bad Boy Records Harve Pierre, and another man of gang raping her when she was just 17 years old. Harve Pierre and Combs have both vehemently denied the allegations. But fast forward to December of 2024, a year after Doe filed her suit against them, a judge ruled that the plaintiff had to identify herself if she wanted her case to move forward. In this case, she did. In an amended complaint, her name was revealed, Anna Kane. In a statement from her lawyer, Kane said, "I had hoped to use a pseudonym in pursuing justice for what happened to me as a teenager. Defendants demand that I use my name was an attempt to intimidate me, but I am not intimidated. I am prepared to proceed and hold accountable those who have harmed me." Just months before Anna Kane filed her amended complaint, a judge ruled a Tennessee Jane Doe who claimed Diddy sexually assaulted her when she was 19 couldn't remain anonymous. In that ruling, the judge wrote, simply put, allegations of sexual assault by themselves are not sufficient to entitle a plaintiff to proceed under a pseudonym. This Jane Doe told the judge she could be harmed if her name was published, but the judge wrote in her decision, quote, "Combs has had no contact with plaintiff for approximately 20 years since the alleged rape, and Combs is currently detained pending trial. As such, counsel has not identified any present threat of physical harm to plaintiff." So the Jane Doe had two options: use her real name or the suit will be tossed. While those rulings seem like a win for Diddy, in another case though, this one where Sean Carter, aka Jay-Z, is also named as a defendant, a judge ruled this Jane Doe can remain anonymous, at least for now. In this case, an Alabama woman using the name Jane Doe claimed she was raped by Jay-Z and Diddy when she was just 13 years old. Both denied the claims. Initially, Sean Carter's name wasn't attached to the lawsuit when it was first filed in October of 2024, but then she filed an amended complaint naming Carter as the other celeb who allegedly sexually assaulted her. When it was amended, Jay-Z slammed the lawsuit, calling it a blackmail attempt by the accuser's attorney, Tony Busby. And the two have had a lethal war of words since. Now, Jay-Z's attorney asked the court to require this Jane Doe to reveal her identity. In a filing by Jay-Z's legal team, they wrote, quote, "Mr. Carter deserves to know the identity of the person who is effectively accusing him in sensationalized, publicity-hunting fashion of criminal conduct, demanding massive financial compensation and tarnishing a reputation earned over decades." While the judge ruled this Jane Doe can remain anonymous, she wrote the ruling may be revisited as the case progresses. Like I mentioned, that's the only lawsuit Jay-Z is named as a defendant. Meanwhile, Combs continues to be hit with lawsuits left and right, even though he's in jail for federal sex trafficking. And of course, we know he pleaded not guilty to those charges. But he was most recently hit with another lawsuit accusing him of rape by another Jane Doe accuser. However, his lawyers have asserted he's innocent. As for country legend Garth Brooks, his accuser was his former makeup and hair artist. She sued Brooks, claiming that he raped her in 2019. But Brooks, like Jay-Z, fired back saying he was being blackmailed. Now, this accuser used a slightly different name, Jane Roe. After she filed her suit in October, Brooks' legal team used her real name in legal documents, wiping away any anonymity. So the accuser's attorney fired back, saying, "In revealing our client's name, Brooks exhibits precisely the type of retaliatory and abusive behavior that compels sexual assault victims to remain silent." Brooks's legal team reportedly argued since his accuser didn't allow the singer to remain anonymous, the same favor wasn't due to the accuser. So it seems despite having the highest paid attorneys that money can buy, that doesn't really matter, as really, judges seem to be splitting their rulings 50-50. Will the Jane and John Does be able to remain anonymous forever? I'm joined now by criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson Ferrer. Safa, always great to see you. Let's kind of get into it. There's been controversy in a way that the Jane and, in some cases, John Does are remaining anonymous when they bring suits against powerful figures, particularly in the music industry, is what we've been seeing recently. But what's your take on the whole situation as a criminal defense attorney? What's really the issue with alleged victims remaining anonymous?
I think from a defense perspective, the issue with victims or alleged victims remaining anonymous is the ability for defendants to confront their accusers, and there may be some overlap with that because oftentimes a defendant will know who is suing them based on the allegations. There may have been disclosures and gag orders that have been placed upon them in court, but generally the ability to confront their accusers. Not only that, but also the public has an interest in knowing what is going on in court, what the judicial proceedings are. It's a First Amendment, issue with respect to the, freedom of, it's a First Amendment issue with respect to freedom of speech, freedom of press, and the ability for the media and the public to be aware of what's going on in our courtrooms in this country. And so, although, there's a sensitivity with respect to victims, and we always want to protect the sanctity of what they've gone through, from a defense perspective, is we want things as transparent as possible. Not only that, but as we are preparing to go through the proceedings, ultimately possibly going through trial, the ability for us to be aware and for the public to be aware of the proceedings that are pending also put us at an advantage to an extent, because in the event that we have an innocent defendant, then we have other individuals who may be aware of who this John or Jane Doe is. They could assist in our investigations. They can assist in combating our claims. So I think it's very important for that transparency.
And in your opinion, why do you think the rulings haven't remained the same in these types of cases? One judge makes a Diddy accuser reveal their name. In another case, a judge said the Jane Doe accusing Jay-Z and Diddy of rape can still remain anonymous. In Diplo's case, the plaintiff had to reveal her name. Then in Garth Brooks' case, he named his own accuser, who previously was anonymous. But why do you think the rulings just haven't been across the board the same rulings?
The rulings are definitely inconsistent, and the primary reason for that is because when courts determine whether an individual can file under a Jane or John Doe pseudonym, they are taking a balancing test approach. They are balancing the privacy of the alleged plaintiff in the case with the interest in the public knowing what's going on in the court system and in judicial proceedings. Also, if there's the ability for retaliation and a number of other things that the court will employ in their balancing test to determine whether or not the judge or the court deems that this person should remain anonymous. Oftentimes, too, when judges are sitting on the bench, yes, they must follow the law, but they also bring in their personal experiences and personal perspectives. So you may have a judge that's more conservative, that's sitting on the bench or sitting over the case, that may make one decision, and a judge that's more liberal that may make another decision, all while still employing the same type of balancing test.
Say judges across the nation are on the same page and they rule that accusers can't remain anonymous. What type of message do you think that sends to victims of sexual assault or of rape or of abuse in terms of seeking justice without this fear of retribution by high powered lawyers or even crazy fan bases?
Unfortunately, I feel for victims who have to ultimately disclose some of the things that have happened to them. They're very sensitive allegations. They often deal with, again, sexual abuse, the most intimate moments of themselves and their bodies. And so I definitely sympathize with that. And I think most of us would ultimately sympathize with that. However, on the opposite end, when you're talking about the legal system and the judicial system and balancing the equities of this system, what I think it's ultimately going to do is force victims to disclose who they are and their identities, but also to deter frivolous actions. We want to do our best to avoid that in terms of litigation, and just we don't want to see the filing of complaints of individuals who may not know the defendants or are filing claims just because the defendant is some high-powered celebrity. So there's a deterrent factor in doing so, I believe.
And then on that flip side, do you see the law leaning more towards kind of protecting victims? We've come a long way now since the Me Too movement, but do you see more rulings that Jane or John Doe plaintiffs can continue to remain under anonymity?
I do expect and I do see that there are going to be more rulings where Jane and John Doe's will be able to remain anonymous, but they're only going to be able to remain anonymous to a point. As litigation continues and there start to be, interrogations, depositions, or interrogatories and things of that nature, again, heading towards trial, there's going to likely come to a point where the individual who's the plaintiff in this case is going to be their identity is going to be revealed, and again, that's just a part of the legal system, that's a part of the justice system. And but at the moment, and as we continue to see these cases come in, I think that the judges are going to start to take a look at these and say we want to protect the integrity of the judicial system, the victims and their stories, and we're going to allow them to file Jane and John Doe's to a point.
And as kind of going off of the Me Too question for my last question, excuse me, we saw that huge reckoning somewhat in a way in Hollywood with the Me Too movement. Why do you think that the music industry hasn't really had that same reckoning in that same sense? Back when it was Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, everyone was quick to defend the victims, but you're not seeing that kind of same passion for alleged victims and who bring about suits in the music industry. Why do you think there's not that kind of connection between believing victims versus kind of defending defendants?
Not only that, but I think as the world has changed and we now have social media, we have Instagram, TikTok, and all of these things where people have become public, I see oftentimes that there's a chase for that 15 minutes of fame. And so not only are we seeing that more and more now, there's a heightened danger in individuals filing frivolous lawsuits to get some type of A, financial gain, and B, to gain some type of notoriety or celebrity based off of who they're going after in these cases, which are oftentimes high profile celebrities. Also, and lastly, with regard to the music industry and the things that oftentimes go on, there's parties, there's drug use and things like that. The question of whether or not an individual could have consented to those things and then ultimately later may have regretted it. So now they're trying to insulate themselves, with now filing a lawsuit, things like that. All of those things and scenarios come into play.
And I want to quickly turn to Jay Z's case. Now, at this time, he only faces one accuser, the Jane Doe who accused him and Diddy of raping her in 2000. Now, there's been kind of controversy on her account of what happened, mainly with the inaccuracies, also pointed out in the NBC interview that she had done. But the judge in that case ruled she could remain anonymous. Now, we know that Jay Z and the accuser's attorney, Tony Busby, have been exchanging kind of back and forth, especially as Jay Z accuses Busby of blackmailing him. But what do you make of Jay Z's attorney's tactics throughout all of this? They aren't attacking the accuser. Instead, they're kind of seemingly going after the accuser's attorney, Tony Busby. What are your thoughts on that strategy, given Busby has brought a number of anonymous lawsuits against Sean Combs, aka Diddy?
With respect to Mr. Busby, there's an allegation that as we in the legal field, we call them ambulance chasers, where, he is essentially representing a group of individuals and a bunch of individuals, possibly sort of baiting alleged victims to file these lawsuits against high powered celebrities. So we have that on one end, and I get it, that's his job at the end of the day. On the flip side, while that may be a somewhat smart tactic, it's really not going to do anything for their litigation. There's there's a civil process with respect to this because this is pending in civil court, and there's civil procedure. There's a time for certain things, a time for certain pleadings and things of that nature, and the part has to take its course. So I don't think that necessarily attacking Mr. Busby, no matter what you may think of him, is really going to do a benefit inside of the courtroom.
All right, Safa Robinson Ferrer, always great to hear your insight into these cases. Before we sign you off, though, in your opinion, do you see more Jane or possibly John Doe cases still being brought about against Sean Combs, aka Diddy?
I certainly expect that there will be. I believe that his criminal case is scheduled to go to trial in the middle of this year. I expect that there's probably going to be some more cases filed, as things continue, and after there's either an acquittal or a conviction on that case. So I do unfortunately expect that there are going to be some additional cases and filings under John Doe status in his cases.
All right, Safa Robinson Ferrer, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, the lawsuit against Diplo was tossed out. As for Sean Carter and Garth Brooks, their respective lawsuits from their accusers are still ongoing at this time. As for Sean Combs, in addition to the number of lawsuits he still faces, which he's denied the allegations, he still is facing a federal sex trafficking trial here in New York. That trial is slated to begin in May, and he's pleaded not guilty to his charges.